Nestled between the snowy mountaintops of the French Alps lies a small and idyllic town called Briançon. This is a place where you'll find the locals chopping wood, congregating at the local church, and living out their lives in peace and quiet. This is a little French town where not much has changed in over 1,000 years. But now, the peace is being shattered, and something suddenly seems different. North African and Middle Eastern migrants roam the streets, while up to 50 more cross the snowy mountains from Italy every day. It is a phenomenon locals have begun to call an invasion, and it is creating a huge division in the town. There are countless others in Europe with similar stories. Tales of a sudden boom in migrants taking permanent residence almost overnight are not uncommon in towns like Briançon. Our focus is often placed on metropolitan cities, urban centers where clashes of cultures have long been a well-documented issue. But mass migration and open borders are now starting to take their toll on remote communities, the faces of which are changing rapidly. With governments failing to intervene, the people of Europe are finding themselves forced to shoulder the responsibility. Generation Identity is a coalition of European youth from across the continent who are taking the future of their people into their own hands. Over the past week, they've come to this rural mountain town, organizing a symbolic action in Briançon to address this very problem. Something that has always fascinated me is activism in Europe. And while America often dominates the news cycle, without an active war in your country, grabbing the attention of the world is near impossible. So while Americans buy branded hats and take to the streets to display their political views, the activists in Europe are forced to take an entirely different tactic if they hope to have any impact at all. And that is what brought me to Briançon, where activists from Generation Identity have launched their second Defend Europe mission. In an act of unparalleled organization and planning, this 150-strong team of activists has managed to build a blockade on the popular migrant crossing from Italy to France, hoping to halt the influx of people illegally crossing into the country. To find out more about this peculiar crisis, I spoke to the head of Generation Identity Austria, Martin Zellner. So what is it exactly that your activists are doing in the Alps?
The first thing we did was we went to the mountain pass called the Shell. It's a hotspot for migrant passing. Everybody knows it in France and Italy. And we built up a fence there, 2 border posts. We had helicopters and even a plane to control the area to get a better image of the area around. And we handed out leaflets in Italy at the train stations to migrants to tell them the pass is now closed. And then with the help of our eternal ally, the media, it got a big thing. We got a lot of attention. And this is actually deterring migrants from going there. It's creating attention. All the people are talking about it, police officers came, so that's what we want. We want to put the eye of the media, of the public consciousness on this very hotspot. I think we're living in an extreme situation where the government is actually doing extreme things, like flooding Europe with illegal migrants, shutting people down or actually putting them in prison if they are criticizing that. And what we are doing is we want to be a force of order, and we want to do what actually should be the job of a government. And I think banning illegal immigration and just acknowledging that there's a limit for the capacities of assimilation of people we can take in our cultures and countries, it's not a right-wing thing or left-wing thing, it's just a matter of being a sane person.
Almost immediately on my arrival in the Alpine town, I was surrounded by noise and activity. Escorted from my hotel, I headed into the mountain pass with a convoy of Europe's right-wing activists. Once we reached the top of the mountain, I was immediately struck by the scale of the operation. With an entire fence, a 24-hour guard team, helicopters, planes, and a multi-vehicle escort, it was clear these guys took the threat seriously. Up in the plane, my thoughts were dominated by how impressed I was that a band of activists in their 20s, hundreds of them from all across Europe, were managing to take such decisive action in this remote mountain crossing. No matter what one might think of this mission, some have criticized it as a vain and ineffective PR stunt. Seeing it in person, it is impossible not to be impressed. It is a phenomenal feat. It's something I can truly say I have never seen from American and Canadian activists, who I don't doubt have an infinite amount more funding and an almost non-existent relative pushback from the government. So I asked Martin why he thought this town was so important and why he thinks Canadian and American activists don't take a similar approach.
I think there's a big difference between the Anglo-Saxon liberal Western nations, which don't really have this history and tradition of political resistance. In America, you have a two-party system. In the UK, basically the same. And in Europe, especially in Central Europe, Germany, France, Italy, you have a history of revolutions and fighting movements. So we have a history of being active in France. They actually call it militant. So for us, it sounds really crazy, but in France, militant is a completely normal word. So I think there's a history and a tradition of political activism, but I think it's also possible in the UK, in the United States, in Canada. I think it's just the matter of people see this potential and do it.
Generation Identity have promised to continue to patrol the Alps, and it seems they've effectively forced the police and French border force to have a presence in the area as well. But for the most part, this action was seen by the world and media as a symbolic gesture, and that is a good thing. The ordinary people of this small remote town now know that someone out there cares, and so do the French establishment. This is an operation that has sent shockwaves through Europe and has opened up an important and pressing conversation about a European crisis of immigration.